Hello, it's JB Helm. Thanks for tuning in. So, do you remember things from what age? When's your earliest memories? I was doing some research and they say that children have memory amnesia. Basically, that ends around ages 3 or 4. So, around 5, you start to remember. Now, of course, a lot of kids start school, kindergarten around 5, or, I don't even know what time maybe they start earlier now because of pre-kindergarten, but I started when I was 5. Um, and I do remember my very first day at kindergarten because, I was like not that happy about going to school the first day. But I don't remember the second day or the third day. In fact, I only remember two things about kindergarten. I only remember my first day, and I remember one day when the kids got out of hand and were throwing things at the teacher, which was, you'll normally remember things that kind of scared you too, And I was worried about the teacher, and I didn't throw anything at her. I was I was too nice for that. They were throwing chalk and erasers, and I mean it was a mess. So it was something we were playing with too, and and this poor teacher. Um, but it's interesting because a lot of the memories that we have from like that age are just glimpses. That's the thing. Even my first day of kindergarten, all I remember is that when my mother dropped me off, I was upset. And I remember that other day, and all I remember is the kids throwing something and the teacher being upset. But it's just a glimpse. It's very quick. Um, and I wonder how much these things affect us, long term. These little glimpses of these memories we have, these early memories. And basically, before that, we can't remember anything. I mean, maybe there's some people that can remember things from 3 or 4 years old. They claim here in some of the research I did on Gemini that some of the memories that people think they have are actually something that they manufactured after seeing a photograph or something that their parents said. Like, do you remember this or do you remember that? I don't know. I kind of think sometimes maybe I have a memory from when I was like 4, but I'm not sure because I could have been 5 or 6. Um, some things I think are stay with you for a reason too. Like for instance, when I was a little boy, I think I was like 7 or 8, and I know we still lived in Brooklyn. We hadn't moved yet, and I saw something. I was watching the news, and they were talking about a politician. I think it was a congressman. I have no idea who it was, but it was somebody in New York, a politician, and I just pointed to the TV and I said that guy's no good. And my father said, "Why did you say that?" I said, "Well, they've been saying, he's been on the news. They say he's no good." So my father said, "Well, he hasn't been, arrested or convicted or accused of any crime or anything. They don't like him." He says that these people on the news don't want you to vote for him, so they're criticizing him, and they want someone else to win. He said. So I said, "Well, it's on the news. You're saying that the news isn't always true?" And he says, "Yeah, that's what I'm saying, especially when it comes to politics." He says, they're trying to sort of sway you. And I was just, I was a little boy, and that stuck with me though because when I got even like around 13, 14 years old, I started to see even in high school that certain teachers were saying things that they probably shouldn't say to us. In other words, they were inflicting their opinion into some of the wording as they were trying to teach us geography or something like that. And they were giving, in other words, they were giving their opinions here and there. There's only like a couple of teachers that did that, and it wasn't terrible, but they still were overstepping a little bit because they weren't, they got off the subject of teaching. Like one person said something, he says he criticized Coca-Cola, and I remember I thought about that. He says he shouldn't be doing that, and I told my father, I said, I told him what he said about Coca-Cola. Um, And my father said, my father was a stockbroker at the time. He was a bartender earlier, when we lived in Brooklyn, but then he became a stockbroker. And my father said, "Well, Coca-Cola is one of the greatest companies in the world. They pay well. They get really good benefits, and thousands of people in the country own stock in Coca-Cola." He said, and the stock keeps going up because they keep making money. And he says, so they're one of the great American success stories. And he says, yeah, you're right. Your teacher shouldn't be criticizing Coca-Cola. He says, he may be anti, corporation. But I'm glad that my father told me that, though, at that young age, that about that politician, because it made me more aware of the fact that you can't trust something just because you see it on TV, or just you see it reported on the news. And my dad told me that day too. And it's funny, even though I was young, I remembered. He says, when it comes to politics in particular, do your research and make the decisions for yourself. Don't let people tell you what to think. And with the fiction that I've been writing, with the thrillers I've been writing, I noticed that it's so different because I have songs too, right? So I still write songs, and I've been writing songs, since I was a teenager. Mainly the lyrics, although I come up with melodies sometimes, and I'll sing them, and somebody will put music to them. Or now I can use Suno. I can actually sing my melody into Suno if I want, and put my words in there, and then next thing you know, I can hear the song. But with music, you can write really good songs when you're 16 years old. Carole King wrote most of her best songs when she was either a teenager or early 20s. But when it comes to writing a novel, it doesn't make any difference. You don't have that. It's not an inner child type of artistic situation. And it's actually better to have more experience when you're writing, because a lot of these experiences and these memories are sort of come into the process, the writing process. You're kind of filtering these things that you learned in life through your characters and through and even your storyline. Especially when it comes to the emotions and everything. I mean, if you're going to have people who have like a friendship or some sort of relationship or romance, if you were 16 years old, you wouldn't be able to write that, because you haven't had many, you haven't had any romantic experiences, right? So you can write better fiction when you have something, a life behind you, of different things that you've done and things that you experience, and with friends and everything. And I was thinking about it too. It's really wonderful in the way that people have these phones with the cameras now, because I wish I would have kept a journal my whole life, to tell you the truth, a written journal. Even if you just put there's a day when not much happens, you could just put just a regular day. You could just kind of skip that day, just put a short note. But there were so many times I was with friends or relatives, or certain days where I would have, I should have written something. I should have just kept a journal. Now people have these photo journals now, or either videos or photos, because they carry these phones, which is great, because I can go into my Google, now, my Google Photos, and I could just scroll and say, well, I want to look at the pictures from that wedding we went to, 12 years ago, and I can just go down to that year, and there they are. And I can look back, and I can look at pictures of my grandchildren when they were born, and I can go back to my wife and I certain anniversaries. I remember that anniversary we went, on vacation. Let me look up the photos from that. So it's all important, because when you get older, these memories are important. Now, of course, it's good to live your life to the fullest too, so that you have good memories. And so I was just thinking too of a memory the other day. One of the first concerts I went to was Jethro Tull, and we had two groups of friends. I drove, my car was full, we had 5 in my car, and then another friend drove. And on the way back, we were singing Aqualung and taking turns going around the car, making up our own lyrics, which were hysterical. And now, of course, I remember that because we were laughing so loud for the whole time, and we sang the song for like probably 10 minutes straight. Just every one of us taking turns making up our own lines, and we had a blast that night. Um, and that's the thing. It's always something significant that you remember about a particular night. Now, all I remember of that night is sitting, where we sat watching Jethro Tull because we were behind them. We happened to be behind the stage in Nassau Coliseum in Nassau County, New York. So I remember that, but I don't remember anything else. I just remember, they were playing, and then I remember that driving home. I remember that we had two cars, and I remember in my car we were singing that song. If you have, memories from far back, I'd love to hear it. Like I'd love to read your comments on that. How far back you think your memories start, and if there's any particular memory that you think may have influenced you as you got older. I just put a new song, All Your Love. I just wrote this song today, actually. I've been working on it a little bit, and it was supposed to be a song, supposed to be a darker song, but I don't have a dark soul. So once I got to the chorus, of course, I ended up with a chorus that was more upbeat, but the song I think came out pretty good. It's called All Your Love. I just put a little video for that. Eventually I'm going to put longer videos and string the songs together. But anyway, this is JB Helm. I'd appreciate if you subscribe to my channel, and I'd really like to hear your comments on memories, how your early memories influence you and how far back you go with your early memories. Thanks for tuning in.